It started subtly, the kind of thing you wouldn't notice unless you were looking for it. But why would I? My little brother Sam was just the same as ever, a mischievous 9-year-old with a knack for annoying me. He'd barge into my room at the worst times, leaving Legos on the floor for me to step on or pestering me to play video games with him. I remember the first time I felt something was off. It was late one evening, and I was sitting in my room, scrolling through my phone. The house was quiet. Mom and Dad had already gone to bed, and Sam was supposed to be asleep too. But then I heard something faint. A soft humming, almost like a lullaby, but not quite. It was coming from Sam's room. At first, I figured he was just messing around with one of his toys again. I sighed, got up, and knocked lightly on his door. "Sam, it's late. Go to sleep." No response. The humming continued, so I pushed the door open. The moment I stepped inside, the sound stopped. Sam was lying in his bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. The moonlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across his face. His expression was blank, almost serene, but in a way that made my skin crawl. "Sam?" I whispered. He didn't blink, didn't move, just kept staring. For a moment I stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. Then, without warning, he turned his head sharply toward me. His eyes locked onto mine, dark, empty. It wasn't the look of my little brother. It was cold, alien. "You shouldn't be here," he whispered in a voice that was barely his own. It was lower, almost guttural. I backed out of the room, my heart racing, and shut the door behind me. I told myself it was just Sam being weird. Maybe he was sleepwalking or had a nightmare. Yeah, that had to be it. But the next morning, things got worse. At breakfast, Sam was quiet, unusually so. Normally, he'd be chattering away, talking about the latest game he was playing or what he wanted to do after school. But that morning, he just sat there, staring at his cereal. Mom noticed too. "Everything okay, sweetie?" she asked, brushing his hair back. Sam flinched at her touch, his face twitching into an expression I'd never seen before, a mix of disgust and fear. "I'm fine," he muttered, his voice flat, eyes still fixed on his bowl. I could feel the unease growing in the pit of my stomach. Something was wrong. It wasn't just his mood. It was the way he moved, the way he spoke, like he was off somehow. Like the Sam I knew was buried underneath something dark and twisted. Later that day, I overheard Mom and Dad talking in hushed tones. They thought Sam was coming down with something, maybe a fever, some bug. But I knew it wasn't that. Something else had taken hold of him. That night it got worse. I was in my room, trying to distract myself with homework, when I heard the soft tapping. At first I thought it was the wind. It was October, and the nights had started to get colder. But when I looked toward my window, the tapping wasn't coming from outside. It was coming from my closet. I froze, staring at the door. The tapping continued, slow, rhythmic. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly stood up and walked over to the closet, every instinct telling me to turn around and run. But I didn't. I reached for the door handle, hesitating for just a moment, before pulling it open. Nothing. The closet was empty. I exhaled sharply, feeling stupid for letting myself get so freaked out. But as I turned back toward my bed, I saw Sam standing in the doorway. I jumped, my heart lurching into my throat. He just stood there, motionless, watching me. His eyes were wide, unblinking, and his lips were curled into a strange, tight smile. It wasn't a smile I'd ever seen on him before. "Sam?" I asked, my voice trembling. "I've been waiting," he whispered. His voice was that same low, guttural tone from the other night. "For what?" I managed to ask, taking a step back. He tilted his head, his smile growing wider, almost grotesque. "For you to listen." "Listen to what?" Before he could answer, the lights flickered. The room grew colder, and I felt a heavy pressure in the air, like something invisible was pressing down on my chest. Sam stepped forward, his movements slow, deliberate. His eyes were still locked on mine, but they seemed darker now, almost black. "You shouldn't have opened the door," he said, his voice distorting into something that didn't sound human. I backed up until I hit the wall, my breath coming in short, panic gasps. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't move. I was paralyzed with fear. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The lights came back on, the coldness in the room faded, and Sam blinked. He looked around, confused, like he had just woken up from a dream. "Hey," he said, rubbing his eyes. "What's going on?" I stared at him, my mind racing. Did he not remember what just happened? You were acting weird," I stammered, my voice shaky. Sam frowned. "Weird? What do you mean?" I didn't know how to explain it, so I just shook my head. "Never mind, go back to bed." He shrugged and left, closing the door behind him like nothing had happened. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Had I imagined it? No, it felt too real. There was something wrong with Sam. Something was inside him, and it wasn't letting go. Over the next few days, the strange behavior continued. Sam would go through long stretches of silence, staring off into space, only to snap back to normal with no memory of what had happened. He started drawing strange symbols in his notebooks, intricate patterns that looked ancient and menacing. Once, I caught him standing at the foot of my bed in the middle of the night, just watching me sleep. His eyes were wide, his expression blank. When I confronted him about it the next morning, he didn't remember a thing. The worst part was the laughter. It started as quiet giggles, like he was laughing at some private joke. But soon it turned into full-blown hysterical laughter that would last for minutes at a time. It was a hollow, chilling sound that echoed through the house, making the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Mom and Dad noticed his strange behavior, but they chalked it up to stress or a phase. They didn't see what I saw. They didn't hear the whispers in the middle of the night, the strange voices that seemed to come from nowhere. One night, I'd had enough. I decided to confront whatever was inside my brother. I waited until everyone was asleep, then quietly crept into Sam's room. He was lying in bed, his eyes closed, breathing softly. For a moment, I thought maybe it was all in my head. Maybe Sam was just going through something, and I was overreacting. But then his eyes snapped open, and he sat up in bed, staring straight ahead. His face was blank, but his eyes, they were different. They glowed faintly in the dark, like something inhuman was looking back at me. "Who are you?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Sam, or whatever was inside him, smiled. It was that same eerie smile, the one that twisted his face into something unrecognizable. "I am the one who watches," he said, his voice distorted, echoing off the walls. "I have been here for a long time." "Get out of my brother," I shouted, my fear turning into anger. The entity inside Sam chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound that didn't belong to a child. "He is mine now. You cannot stop me." Desperation clawed at me, but I wasn't going to give up. I stepped closer, my hands shaking. "You're wrong. He's stronger than you think." For a moment, there was silence. Then Sam's face contorted, his eyes rolling back into his head. He convulsed violently, his body thrashing as if something inside him was being ripped apart. I could hear him whispering, but the words made no sense. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. Sam collapsed back onto the bed, his chest heaving. For a long moment I stood there, frozen, afraid to move. But then he opened his eyes, and they were his eyes, clear, normal, and full of confusion. "Sam?" I whispered. He looked at me, blinking in the darkness. "What's going on? Why are you in my room?" I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know if he remembered any of it, but I could see it in his face. He was back. My little brother was back. I thought you were having a nightmare," I lied, my voice shaky. Sam rubbed his eyes, yawning. "I feel weird." "You'll be okay," I said, forcing a smile. Just go back to sleep.